Today, we're going to get into the incredible true story of a man whose journey is just almost unbelievable. It's a story about faith, it's a story about freedom, and it's about how one single voice can rise above unimaginable oppression and literally change the world.
So I want you to picture this. Our story starts at the absolute lowest point you could imagine for a human being. A man, born a slave, considered less than property, being tortured under the crushing weight of a massive rock in the middle of a scorching hot desert.
And it ends with that very same man standing on top of the most sacred building in his society, his voice ringing out in a call that would completely redefine justice and honor for an entire civilization. So, how on earth did he get from point A to point B? Well, let's dive in. To really get Bilal's rise, you first have to understand the brutal world he was born into. This is Mecca, a city built on a rigid hierarchy of tribe, wealth, and power, a place where some lives were simply not considered to matter at all. Now, what's really key here is the contrast. On the outside, Bilal's life was bleak. He was Abyssinian, from what we'd now call Ethiopia, and he was owned by a truly cruel master, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, who saw him as nothing more than a tool. But on the inside, Bilal had something his master could never own, a free soul and a sharp mind that could see the total foolishness of worshipping man-made idols. So where did that first spark of change come from? Ironically, it came from his own oppressor. Bilal would overhear his master, Umayyah, talking with this mix of pure rage and fear about a new message spreading through Mecca. A message from the Prophet Muhammad about a religion that made master and slave equal. And what terrified the tyrant deeply intrigued the slave. So Bilal secretly met with the Prophet and embraced Islam. But of course, a light that bright can't stay hidden for long. When his conversion was discovered, it led to one of the most brutal and legendary tests of faith in all of history. Umayyah was absolutely furious. He decided to make Bilal a public spectacle, a warning to everyone else. This wasn't just random torture, it was a system. Every single day, at high noon, when the desert sand was hot enough to cook on, he'd drag Bilal out, strip him, and pin him to the ground with a giant rock. The choice was simple: renounce his God or die. And this is where Bilal's response becomes legendary. With the breath literally being crushed out of his lungs, he couldn't give a long speech. He couldn't recite scripture. All he could get out was one single powerful word. Ahad. One. In a city that worshipped 360 idols, that one word was the ultimate act of defiance. It was a declaration that struck right at the heart of everything his torturers believed. Now, Bilal's incredible defiance didn't go unnoticed. One day, a man named Abu Bakr, a close friend of the Prophet, saw this horrific scene playing out and knew he had to do something. And what happened next? This negotiation, it perfectly captures the whole theme of this story. After Abu Bakr paid a high price to buy Bilal's freedom, Umayyah just sneered at him, showing his complete contempt. To him, Bilal was worthless. He basically said, "I would have sold him to you for next to nothing." He saw zero value in the man he'd just been torturing. But Abu Bakr's response? Wow, it's one of the most powerful comebacks you will ever hear. He shot right back, "And I would have paid 100 times more." It just brilliantly shows you the two worldviews clashing. One man saw a worthless object, the other saw a human being of immeasurable value. And the respect Bilal earned was just immense. I mean, years later, Umar ibn al-Khattab, who would go on to become one of the most powerful leaders in the world, referred to this moment by calling both men our master. He put the former slave, Bilal, on the exact same level of honor. Just incredible. Okay, so now Bilal is a free man, and his story takes another huge turn. He travels with the Prophet to the city of Medina. There, this new growing community needed a way to call everyone together for prayer, and Bilal's destiny was about to transform all over again. So the community came up with this role of the Muezzin, the person who calls to prayer. And you have to understand, this wasn't just being a town crier. This was a position of immense spiritual honor. This was the person whose voice would become the heartbeat of the community's daily life. Now get this. When the words for the call to prayer were finally decided upon, the man who first learned them was told by the Prophet Muhammad himself to go and teach them to Bilal. And the reason why, it wasn't about his social status or his family connections or his wealth. The reason was so simple and so beautiful. He has a more melodious voice. Bilal was chosen for his unique God-given talent. And this all leads us to the absolute climax of Bilal's entire story. Years later, the Muslims returned triumphantly to Mecca, the very same city where Bilal was once dragged across burning sand. And what happened next was just a moment of profound poetic justice. I mean, this slide says it all, right? The entire power structure of the city was completely flipped on its head. The city of idols was now dedicated to one God. The rule of arrogant tribes was replaced by divine justice. And the man who was once crushed on its ground was now ordered by the Prophet to climb to the very roof of the Kaaba, the holiest site, to make the call to prayer. So you can imagine the old, arrogant elite of Mecca still there, watching this whole thing unfold. And their reaction was just pure racist shock. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. To them, a former black slave standing in that sacred position of honor, it was an insult. It completely shattered their entire worldview. And in that exact moment, a divine revelation came down, a verse from the Quran that answered their prejudice head-on. It was like a divine mic drop, cementing the moral of Bilal's entire life, that the true measure of a person isn't their skin color or their tribe or their social status. In the eyes of God, it's their righteousness, their character. But the story doesn't just end with victory. It's also a story of deep love and loss. After the Prophet Muhammad passed away, Bilal was just overcome with grief. His voice, which was so connected to his beloved friend and mentor, just fell silent in the city of Medina. Years later, while visiting Medina, he was persuaded to call the prayer one last time. And as his voice began, they say the whole city just trembled with memory. But when he reached the line that mentioned the Prophet's name, his voice broke, and this huge wave of weeping just swept through the streets. His voice was like a key that unlocked the entire city's collective love and sorrow. Bilal eventually moved to Damascus. And on his deathbed, when his wife was weeping, he gently corrected her. He told her not to be sad, but to be joyful. He wasn't filled with sorrow. He was filled with joy. He saw death not as an end, but as a happy reunion with the people he loved. His faith had totally taken away the fear of death. So Bilal's voice is no longer heard, but his life story, man, it just echoes through history. It forces all of us to face this timeless question, one that's just as relevant today as it was 1,400 years ago in the sands of Mecca. What is the true measure of a person? What do we use to judge their worth? Their status, their wealth, their color, or something else entirely?